Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Ballerina, a Korean action thriller from 2023, not to be confused with the John Wick spin-off film Ballerina to be released later this year in 2024. One interesting observation about this Korean film is that it was directed by Lee Chung-hyun, the director of The Call, a fairly recent film that I enjoyed very much. The lead actress is Jeon Jong-seo, who was the co-lead in The Call, and also the female lead in Burning, which is a very highly acclaimed Korean film from recent years. So we have some positive signs that Ballerina will be an entertaining film at least. But is it a great film? Let's find out here. So Jang Ok-ju, played by Jeon Jong-seo, is a former bodyguard for VIP clients. And after discovering her best friend's dead body in a bathtub, she decides to murder the sex trafficker who victimized her friend through assault and blackmail. The problem is that this man has been employed by a criminal organization whose best interest is to keep this issue private. Now, the opening scene is something that's fairly cliche nowadays. I mean, it was cliche years ago. You get some thugs attempt to rob a convenience store, and our protagonist shows up nonchalantly and just beats them all up without any fear whatsoever. I mean, there's like no caution. She just throws caution to the wind and just strolls right on in, and it's a little bit too try-hard in trying to make our protagonist like a badass. I was a little bit worried during this scene, like, are we going to have a protagonist who just like has no struggles whatsoever and just like walks through every scenario? But things are rectified after that. We want our main character to struggle a little bit, and she does get beaten up pretty good at certain points in the film, so that's good. Became less of an issue later on. Now, in regard to the action design, the opening fight scene itself is edited a little bit too tightly, and it's something that happens quite a bit in Korean action films, and I've made this complaint many times before on this channel. For purposes of comparison, if you were to compare the opening fight in Ballerina to the opening fight in Baby Assassins, this one compares fairly poorly to the other, which was shot far more cleanly. But the good news is this: the fights in Ballerina do improve later on. Now, after the opening, this film goes into like a slow burn thriller territory for a while. And there are definitely some creepy, perverted dudes in this one. Definitely. It has a slightly darker edge than what you might expect, although reading the plot synopsis, maybe you would go in expecting that. But it was slightly darker than what I was expecting, which is a good thing, because the story itself, kind of commonplace, a little bit bland. Character work, pretty thin in this. There's nothing especially fascinating going on here, so I think the darker edge to it kind of helps to keep you in it. Although there are a few good non-action scenes in this. There's one where our protagonist goes to shop for guns, and it's kind of an awkward, conversation that occurs, and it's kind of made for black humor, and it works. I was laughing during that scene. So that's one scene of a few that work quite well outside of the action. But I should point out that the runtime here is only 1 hour and 33 minutes, which definitely helps. If this was a typical Korean film, ran like 2 hours, 10 minutes, you would have really felt the pacing in this. But as is, the pacing is good enough. There are a few little slow patches where it goes into like the sliminess of the bad guys, but the pacing's fine. The film definitely comes alive though during the fights. Like I said, the later fights are pretty solid. You get near the midpoint especially, there's a legitimate one-on-one fight against a dude who's like a strong, formidable opponent, and our protagonist has to work to attempt to win that fight. Again, maybe there are a few shots edited a bit too tight, but it's satisfying in its brutality, and it has like a high-impact, violent vibe to it, and I liked it. There are a few bonus bad guys who show up too along the way in that fight, which I liked. And then you get the finale, which takes place in like a drug greenhouse where they're growing plants to use for drugs. And it's like a laboratory, too. It's kind of an interesting set they made for it. Probably the best scene of the whole movie. A mix of gunplay, hand-to-hand fighting, and it is shot more cleanly than the prior fights in the film, which I was kind of surprised when that happened. You get some overhead shots that have a slightly longer take without an edit. Some side angles that worked really well. I kind of wonder why they didn't use that filming technique during the first few fights. Maybe it was a stylistic choice, but I think it would have benefited the film if they used that throughout. But it's bloody and violent, good stuff. And the final death scene in this movie is pretty satisfying. It's a good death scene. So I would say that Ballerina, it's not as interesting or expertly crafted as something like The Call. So I would consider it maybe a step down for this director and actress compared to that movie. But even though it's a pretty basic genre film that's a little bit on the shallow side, if you're in the mood for like a violent action thriller that's only like an hour and a half long, it's pretty good. I liked it, and I moderately recommend it. It's currently available on Netflix. And as always, I'll see you next time.